Welcome back, everybody, this week in America. Thank you for being with us on the program. As mentioned, back with us on the show today, talking about the new book, Battling the Duopoly, A Short History of the Reform Party. We'll be talking about third-party candidacies with author-historian Darcy G. Richardson back with us on the program. The author of a recent biography of independent Vermont lawmaker and insurgent presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, and a chronicler of a multi-volume series on independent and third-party politics in the United States. Darcy has written more than a dozen books on American politics and history, the recipient of an outstanding academic title from the prestigious Choice magazine in 2005, and Richardson's books were featured in Newsweek's What You Need to Read Now section in 2010. Long active in third-party politics, Darcy has rubbed shoulders with some of the best-known political figures in the past 3 decades. Besides managing campaigns, he also ran for Pennsylvania Auditor General and the U.S. Senate as a third-party candidate, and in 2012 offered himself as a protest candidate in several Democratic primaries. He's with us on the program today, author also of the award-winning Others, a 4-volume series on U.S. third parties. He knows about third parties, obviously, and he's with us on the show to talk about the new book, his new book, Battling the Duopoly, A Short History of the Reform Party. With us back on the show, Darcy Richardson. Darcy, welcome back on the program.
Thank you, Rick. It's great to be here.
It is always a fascinating discussion, and we're going to talk about the new book today. And let's start off back in 1992. At that point, we had Ross Perot's candidacy. He got nearly, I believe, 19% of the vote against George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. And that, if I recall correctly, came out of basically what was a spontaneous movement that year and eventually led to the Reform Party. Talk about what happened in 92 and if, in fact, that did lead to the Reform Party a couple of years later.
Sure. There's no question that Ross Perot's 1992 campaign was probably the greatest threat to the two-party duopoly, at least since Teddy Roosevelt's Bull Moose candidacy in 1912, a year when the former president finished second ahead of President Taft, the sitting president of his own party. Perot's campaign, of course, was launched during an appearance on the Larry King Show in February of 92, and it really took off like wildfire. The country had never seen a truly, as you put it, spontaneous citizens movement quite like that in American history. Largely self-funded, Perot spent about $63.5 million of his own money, much of it, as you'll recall, spent on a battery of infomercials, and he really did give the American electorate a genuine alternative to President George H.W. Bush and Democratic challenger Bill Clinton that year.
And it's amazing when you think about it. Was I right? He was close, just under, 20% in the vote that year?
Yes, exactly. 18.9%. Yep.
Wow, that is just...
So just about.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then some of his United We Stand activists, I believe later in the midterm elections, ran in New York and some other areas. How did they do? Were they much of a force?
They actually were, and that's really unbelievable that you remember that. But the United We Stand activists actually in Minnesota and New York and Pennsylvania and a few other places actually launched their own statewide third parties based on Perot's 1992 campaign. And they competed in several races in the 1994 midterm elections, a year before the National Reform Party was even founded. Perot had formed the United We Stand America movement shortly after the 92 campaign. And it was designed as a kind of grassroots pressure group, a precursor to a new national political party. And it was created to galvanize opposition to the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and to promote Perot's, what I would describe as fiscally conservative and socially liberal agenda, including balancing the federal budget and calling for campaign finance reform. Almost overnight, United We Stand organized chapters in all 50 states, which later became the Reform Party nationally.
With us on This Week in America is Darcy Richardson. His new book is called Battling the Duopoly, A Short History of the Reform Party. His website is darcygrichandson.com. You go directly to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and a link on. I'm sorry I jumped in there and stopped you before you finished that point.
Oh no, that's great. But one of the interesting candidacies in '94 was in New York, where the Independence Party, which had been formed in 1991, they ran a wealthy philanthropist and the co-owner of the National Hockey League's Buffalo Sabres, a guy by the name of Tom Golisano. They ran him for governor in '94. He was as I mentioned, a very wealthy guy. He had made a fortune as the founder of Paychex, which was then the second largest payroll processor in the country. So he ended up running for governor of New York 3 times, but his initial campaign in 1994, he pulled about 217,000 votes against George Pataki and 3-term Democratic incumbent governor Mario Cuomo. So that launched the Independence Party in New York, which, when the National Reform Party was founded, they aligned with them. They affiliated with the National Reform Party. So that a lot of the activists were already out there, organizing parties and running for office before Perot launched the Reform Party.
The fascinating book is called Battling the Duopoly, A Short History of the Reform Party. And we'll jump up to 1996. That year you got President Clinton, you got Bob Dole, you've got Perot back in, and you've got the Reform Party now basically operational. Did he win the party nomination or just jump in? I can't recall exactly what the situation was that year.
Perot was the nominee, but he did, believe it or not, face some competition for the
that's what I thought,
nomination. And that was with former Colorado Governor Dick Lamb. Lamb was a very interesting guy, Princeton educated, kind of a maverick, almost libertarian-leaning Democrat, and he was regarded as one of the most provocative thinkers in American politics at the time. So Perot hadn't really indicated whether he was going to run again in '96, so Lamb saw an opportunity and jumped into the race, actually on July 10th of '96. The party's convention was the following month. But a day after Lamb announced his candidacy, Perot jumped in. so here was Lamb, who had less than $10,000 on hand at the time he announced his candidacy, facing Perot, who was admired by everybody in the party. So Perot was able to defeat Lamb to win the party's nomination and mount his second bid for the presidency.
Now, did he get any federal funds that year?
Yes, he did. Based on his 1992 showing, and that's a great question, Rick, Perot received about $29 million in federal funding for his '96 campaign, but it came with a huge restriction. As I mentioned earlier, Perot had spent about $63.5 million of his own money in '92, but by accepting federal funding, he was limited to spending only $50,000 of his own money on his '96 campaign. So he really entered that race with some huge handicaps. He also had an unfavorable rating, if you look at the national polls, of something like 48%, while his favorables had dropped all the way down into the mid-teens. And he was also excluded from the presidential debates in '96. So it was a much more difficult campaign than his '92 effort.
Later, we heard about the Reform Party on the national basis when Jesse Ventura ran for governor in Minnesota, and he won. You almost were waiting for that to be the spark that we would see the Reform Party taking off in other areas around the country. What happened at that point?
That's perfectly put, Rick. Everyone expected well, first of all, Ventura's candidacy initially wasn't taken seriously. Throughout the campaign, all the way into September and October, he was languishing in the low double digits, really for most of the campaign. And his victory, which was really a come-from-behind victory, was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in American politics. 2 weeks from the election, he was only polling at 21%. He was trailing Republican Norm Coleman by 14 points, and Democrat Skip Humphrey, who was a longtime Attorney General of Minnesota and the son of the late Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey, by 13 points. But he had a really cagey political strategist and creative advertising genius by the name of Bill Hillsman, who put together some of the they were really quirky but imaginative television ads. So on a shoestring budget, and they really caught fire, and Ventura rocketed to an upset victory of by about 4 percentage points over his major party opponents. And everyone thought at that point, okay, like you just stated, the Reform Party is really going to take off.
Yes.
But it didn't. And as a political historian, I've been frequently asked why the Reform Party wasn't able to repeat Ventura's success anywhere else in the country. And I do address this at some length in my book. But it really boils down to Ventura's bigger-than-life persona. Aside from Ross Perot at the presidential level, the Reform Party just wasn't able to recruit anyone of Ventura's stature. He was an ex-Navy SEAL, well-known professional wrestler, actor. He also was an accomplished radio and television personality. And he had been a former mayor. He was the mayor of Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, population of about 65,000. So he had some solid credentials too, in elective office. But unfortunately, the Reform Party wasn't able to find other candidates as colorful or as widely known as Ventura.
With us on the program is Darcy Richardson, author of the book Battling the Duopoly, A Short History of the Reform Party. His website is darcygrichandson.com. Go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on directly. Rapidly running out of time, I want to talk briefly about 2000, then we'll jump ahead to this year and a very interesting candidate that's running for the Reform Party. 2002, a lot of people look back and say, boy, this really was the knife to the heart of the Reform Party. Talk briefly about what happened in 2000.
Well, based on Perot's showing in 96, the Reform Party was eligible for $12.6 million in federal funding to finance their 2000 campaign. And as a result, that money attracted all sorts of people from across the political spectrum that wanted to get a piece of that pie. And there were all various attempts to snare the party's nomination. There was even an attempt to draft Ron Paul at one point, but that effort flamed out rather quickly. Even Donald Trump, at Jesse Ventura's urging, made a brief stab at the party's nomination that year, but he quickly dropped out, saying that he didn't feel comfortable belonging to a party that included pugnacious conservative columnist Pat Buchanan, whom he described as Attila the Hun. But you had interlopers across the spectrum, people on the left like Lenora Fulani, to people on the far right like racist David Duke, a former head of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, everyone was joining the party, and the party had a very divisive national convention in Long Beach that year. And Pat Buchanan ended up winning the nomination, but ran very poorly in November, polling the somewhat dismal 449,000 votes, which was obviously a far cry from the more than 8 million votes that Perot had received in 96. And from then on, the party was clearly on a downward spiral.
Where are we with the party now? For 2016, there is a candidate. Tell me about him, the strategy and the expectations he has going into the election next week.
Sure. Rocky De La Fuente, he's a San Diego businessman. He's kind of like almost a minor party version of Donald Trump, but in an enduring and positive way. He's also a real estate developer. He's a very wealthy individual. He's hoping to rebuild or help rebuild the Reform Party nationally. And party leaders, I've spoken to several of them in the past few days, they believe that unlike some of their previous presidential nominees, that Rocky will stick around after the election to help revive the party. And personally, I think he will. I've spoken with him at length. He's a wonderful guy, very charming and really smart, and I think he's in this for the long haul. So this is his first stab, first run at political office. He's loving it, and I think he wants to do it again in 2020. Now, he has a really interesting background. As I mentioned, he is a first-generation Mexican-American. He was named chairman of the National Dealers Council for what was then the third largest automobile manufacturer in the world while in his late 20s. He at one point owned 28 automobile dealerships, and later parlayed his enormous success in the automobile industry into a real estate empire, acquiring and developing numerous properties throughout the United States. He owns all sorts of properties here in Florida where I live. He's also dabbled in banking. He established no fewer than 3 banks, including a national bank and 2 banks that were chartered by the state of California. But what's not known about him is that he's also something of a philanthropist and humanitarian. But you can't get him to talk about it. He's a very soft-spoken, but he's the most modest person I've ever met in politics. Seriously, he's a very modest guy. Very interesting guy, very, very bright.
It's interesting, his Rocky Mountain strategy. Talk about that in the time remaining, and if part of what he's attempting to do this year is to deny, obviously he's not going to win the presidency, is part of the strategy to deny the presidency to either one of the major candidates?
Yes. About 2 weeks ago, Rocky came up with a strategy which he calls the Rockies strategy, which is kind of a clever play on his name. But what it involves is he wanted to bring together all the third-party candidates: Libertarian Gary Johnson, the Green Party's Jill Stein, Constitution Party's Darrell Castle, Evan McMullin, who's the Never Trump candidate running very well in Utah. And his strategy was that each of the 5 candidates should take 1 or 2 states in the Rocky Mountain states and adjacent states and try to win them, put all their resources into winning 1 or 2 states in that area. But the point being to try to deny either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton from getting to the 270 electoral votes in the Electoral College. Now, none of the other candidates have taken him up on his offer, but Rocky has gone ahead and he's focusing and putting some serious resources into winning Nevada, Montana, and Alaska. And he's actually running television ads in Nevada. So he's serious about this. The other candidates kind of, poo-pooed the idea, and they're trying to continue to run nationally as they're, only polling 3 or
no, exactly,
2%.
Yes.
But so I think it's a pragmatic idea, but the other candidates just aren't going along with it. So he's going to do what he can to try to deny Clinton and Trump at least one state. He thought Evan McMullin should be given a free shot at Utah because he's running very, very well in the polls, almost neck and neck. Yeah, neck and neck with Trump there. So that's kind of his strategy as we enter the final 5 days of the campaign.
It will be fascinating to watch over the course of the next couple of days. If things are tightening as they indicate they very well may be, just one state going to someone other than Trump or Clinton could throw the election into, I think chaos is the word that I'm looking for. It will be interesting.
Exactly.
Give me about a minute before we have to wrap up here. As a historian, when you look at this year's election with 2 candidates that are really not liked by, and that's an understatement, by the general public, is there room for the Reform Party or a viable third party?
I think there is, and the thing that's interesting about Rocky's candidacy and the Reform Party in general is this year, more than any time in my lifetime, there's an opportunity for a party that's centrist oriented. There are millions of moderates and independents who can't stomach the idea of a Trump or Clinton presidency, who likewise view the Green Party's Jill Stein, she's a wonderful woman, but a bit too far to the left, and they look at the Libertarian Party's Gary Johnson as too much of an austerity monger and fiscal extremist. So there is a real opportunity in the middle of the road in this country. If the right party is there with the right candidate, I think this could have been a fantastic year for a centrist party.
We will have you back after the election. A lot that we'll be watching on Tuesday. With us on the program once again is Darcy Richardson, author of the new book, Battling the Duopoly, A Short History of the Reform Party. It's a fascinating read. Information on Darcy in the book available at darcygrichandson.com. You can get all that information by linking onto our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and going directly to Darcy's website. Darcy, it is always a pleasure. A lot we'll be watching for. A great read in Battling the Duopoly, and look forward to having you back on the program.
Thank you, Rick, and nice being here.
Thank you. You're listening to This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. We're back after these messages.